Is the commodities boom a bubble as well?
It's an incipient bubble, yes. There's a definite bubble element in it. I mean, the fact that we've come to the end of an era, we have not come to the end of bubbles. And that's why it has to be the role of the authorities to prevent bubbles from getting, from growing too big. In other words, you can't avoid having variations in prices, but when it goes too far, they do have to do something about it. And that basically requires some kind of control over credit. The central banks control money, but they don't control credit. And you do need, money and credit don't go hand in hand. The monetarist doctrine is part of this market fundamentalist ideology, and it's false. So you have to actually control credit creation, which means that you have to have margin requirements and limits on the amount of leverage that market participants can use. That's the missing element.
In a globalized economy, are those sorts of limits, if imposed at a national level, going to be effective?
No, it would have to be done internationally. You do have
and do you think that's possible? Can you see international agreements?
Not only is it possible, but it's in existence, because you have the so-called Basel Agreement. You had Basel I, and then you had Basel II, which has not yet come into effect. Basel II went so far as to really rely on the risk control mechanisms of the participants. So it practically abdicated the role of the regulator. Now, this is now recognized that that was a mistake. So Basel II, I think, will not actually...
so you think this crisis is the end of Basel II? There's going to have to be a Basel III?
I think there'll have to be a Basel III, and which will actually allow some international margin regulations, or, for instance, maintaining minimum reserves, which the Chinese use quite effectively in controlling their excessive credit expansion. Because China now actually has negative real interest rates because of the appreciation of the renminbi. So that is the making of an asset bubble. And they are trying to control it by increasing the minimum reserve requirements.
Are the Chinese regulators doing a better job of regulating their financial system than the American or British ones?
I wouldn't go that far. I
Not
think
quite?
that no. I think that the Chinese may have a problem in the years to come. So I wouldn't let them.
They have a bubble coming up as well?
They do have a bubble.
Even without market fundamentalism? Even without market fundamentalism?
Yes. We'll have to find out what the flaw is. And I think it's a political flaw, that they basically haven't used their prosperity to allow democracy to develop in China. That is very much a government-controlled economy. So it's the other extreme. At any rate, you do need, I think, margin requirements, minimum reserve requirements, and you will need to apply them internationally to try to break, let's say, the asset bubble. I think increasing margin requirements on commodities, it would be a wise move right now.
What about the UK economy? Do you think that it is likely to face the sorts of problems we're seeing in the US?
I think that the UK economy is as vulnerable, or conceivably more vulnerable than the US, because the financial services represent a larger portion of the UK economy. London looms very large, and the indebtedness of the householders is greater than in the United States. The value of the houses have appreciated more in value. So if houses start going down, it could have, in this respect, UK is closer to the US than to continental Europe. There's a big difference is that in America there has been a big surge of new construction, whereas in UK it's held pretty steady at 100,000. So there isn't the supply of unsold new houses that you have in America.
And have we seen the end of the problems in the U.S. housing market?
We are not even halfway there. It's just really building up. Last month, the annualized rate of decline was 25%. In other words, it's accelerating, and the backlog is not clearing, and the foreclosures haven't yet gone through. So there's the big danger is that you will have something like several million defaults on mortgages in the next few years, and if these result in foreclosures, that will swell the demand, and there will be a tremendous overshoot on the downside, similar to what you had on the upside, or even certainly more sharper than it was on the upside. You know, something that took several years to build up will happen faster on the downside. That's the normal shape of a boom bust.
Will that process of repricing ultimately be necessary or even healthy, or do you think the government needs to do something to put a floor to it?
I think that it really ought to be at the center of government action. In other words, you know, fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus, all good, appropriate. The limitations are much greater than they used to be. But something really needs to be much more focused on preventing foreclosures. You want to keep as many homeowners in their homes as possible, without violating the right to foreclosure, because that's the only recourse that a mortgage holder has. So what you really need is modification of the mortgages. And basically, you have to downsize the mortgages to reflect the ability of the householder to service it. It's much better to take a 25% haircut than to have a foreclosure where you might lose 60% of the value.
Are you optimistic that we'll see measures like those?
No, I think there are several being proposed from the Democratic side, but they haven't passed and not going to pass under this administration. I don't think they will. But there are various efforts at voluntary adjustment, but they are basically exercises in public relations. You need to do more to facilitate it, but it's extremely difficult because of these collateralized debt obligations, which have been sliced up and repackaged. So you now have what is called in the trade a tranche warfare between the various tranches, because they have different interests.
Do you know which tranche is going to win?
No, and it's a difficult thing to. But I think there are ways of overcoming it. But as I say, a lot more ought to be done. That's really, in a way, the most important, single most important policy that's missing.